practice. As I mentioned, you hopefully received yesterday, had a chance to look at Rabbi Sam Feinsmith's essay on this week's theme or sub-theme of the larger theme of Shemitah or release. I'm going to share a couple of highlights from that essay, whether you've seen it or haven't seen it, just to give you the essence of the theme, and then bring in a little bit from this week's Torah portion, Kitei, and then turn both of those into our practice for today. So I'll share my screen, and thanks to Tamar Yanai, who's holding our text space today. Tamar, if you can put the link in the chat box for those for whom that would be more helpful. So these are a couple of excerpts from Sam's framing essay for this week. And this is really the essence of Shemitah practice. Sam writes, we human beings can easily fall into delusion, imagining ourselves to operate independently of the great oneness of being. And in that delusion, the delusion that we are separate and independent, we then fight to hold on to what we presume to own. And this fighting to hold on to what we presume to own can cause illness, crisis, and violence. So the Shemitah practice that the Torah prescribes, the Torah tells us that our wealth and even our strength flow from a limitless, transcendent wellspring of vitality. Everything we have, all that we own, comes from God. And we are asked to release, through Shemitah practice, our habitual tendencies and grow in awareness of our interdependence within the great oneness. That's the umbrella here. We're also to release our habitual tendencies towards grasping, towards greed, towards ownership, towards control, and instead grow in awareness of our interdependence with the great oneness. How does the Torah prescribe this? It counters our desire to manipulate the earth for our benefit by counseling us to put down our man-made instruments, which we use to wantonly extract more wealth from the earth than we need, and let the land lie fallow. This is the Shemitat Karka, letting the land lie fallow. We put down our instruments and we stop working in the land. Second, to undercut our sense of the land as our possession, that we own it. Private ownership of land is suspended for the year, and all fields are open to the commons. There is no private ownership of land in the Shemitah year. To neutralize our greed, amassing and hoarding the earth's produce, we are to take only what we need instead of what we desire, only what we need, and share whatever the land spontaneously grows with all who wish to eat, rich and poor alike, as well as domestic livestock and native wildlife. So we neutralize our greed by only taking what we need. To undermine our tendency to commodify and cheapen that which the earth provides, Shemitah produce, that which grows naturally during the Shemitah year, is considered holy. It may be eaten or employed for personal use, but it can't be sold or thrown away. It is not ours to profit from. And finally, as Sam writes, to disabuse us of the notion that we can profit from someone else's suffering or disenfranchisement. At the end of 7 sabbatical cycles, we mark the Yovel, the Jubilee year, the Great Release, a year when we return all purchased lands to their ancestral tribal holders, so that we never hold land in perpetuity. So, how do we practice Shemitah? Says Sam, we practice Shemitah by resting in mindful awareness. Our practice is to become aware of these habits of mind and heart. We turn inward in quiet contemplation to observe our greed, our fear, and delusion in action. That doesn't sound like fun, I'll say that. Turning inward in quiet contemplation to observe our greed, fear, and delusion in action. As we do, we witness directly how that our sense of being separate and independent, a separate and independent self, arises out of a patchwork of impermanent sensations, feelings, mental images, thoughts, perceptions, and volitions that come together one moment only to dissolve the next. They don't last. We recognize in real time how our anxiety about the dissolution of this illusory sense of self this anxiety causes the mind to reify and cling to the objects of this world. And this arrests the natural flow of energy and vitality moving through us and results in more tension, constriction, and anxiety, leading to more reification and grasping. And we also notice how this sense of a small self tends to divide the world into binaries, with a subject in here, us, me, acting upon and manipulating the objects out there, that's them, that's you, to get what it wants. Just pausing there for a second. So this is a tall order. Sam seems to be saying here in this essay that we're being asked through Shemitah practice to grow an awareness of our natural human tendency to experience ourselves, to think of ourselves as separate, as distinct, as apart from everything and everyone else, which is an illusion. That's an illusion that we live with. And as we become aware of that illusion, we actually, instead of letting it go, might grasp onto it more tightly because we have anxiety about letting it go. And that anxiety can make us double down. So this week's Parsha, Kitei Say, there's a famous passage in it that also is read actually on the Shabbat before Purim, Shabbat Zachor, where Moses enjoins us when we get to the land and we have rest in the land to remember Amalek, who's the kind of the arch villain of the Torah, the group that attacked the vulnerable, straggling Israelites when they left Egypt, shortly after they left Egypt. And I want to share with you for the next few minutes just a couple of texts about this Amalek, which in some ways I think represents that which Sam is encouraging us in this essay to let go of. I'm going back to the screen share. Here's the passage from this week's Parsha from Kitei Say that says, when Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, gives you respite from all your enemies around you in the land which Adonai, your God, gives you. You might say in the year of Shemitah, when we have respite, when we have Noach, Timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim, lo tishkach. Wipe out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Don't forget. Now that's a paradoxical order there. Wipe out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Don't forget. Well, which is it? Wipe out the memory or don't forget? So the paradox here is remembering and forgetting. I want to just bring two more texts here to invite us into the practice. The Kedushat Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, says about Amalek that Amalek is not just an external enemy, but actually a part of every one of us. He says, not only are the children of Israel commanded to blot out the external Amalek, but every individual Jew must blot out that evil part called Amalek, which is hidden in their heart. As long as the seed of Amalek is in the world, since a person is a miniature world, each one of us is a microcosm of the cosmos. Amalek exists in the evil potential within each person, which awakens anew again and again and causes us to sin. Final text here is from the psychologist Carl Jung, who, of course, is famous for writing about the human shadow, which we might describe as that inner Amalek that Levi Yitzchak is talking about. Jung says that our task is to recognize our shadow, our inner Amalek, and to recognize that we have a desire not to own it, but to project it onto others, to demonize others, to make others, quote, other, and instead admit that it is an inescapable presence within ourselves. Just want to suggest that the inclination to experience ourselves as separate, our anxiety about letting go of control and domination, is a manifestation of this inner Amalek. And Jung's prescription for this is as follows. One who is brave enough to withdraw all projections, not projecting this onto others, but to look within, is an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. this person has become a serious problem for themselves as they are unable to say that that is, that others do this or that they are wrong. They must be fought against. In other words, to project it outwards. A person who is brave enough to withdraw those projections knows that whatever's wrong in the world is also in themselves. And if one only learns to deal with one's own shadow, one has done something real for the world. I'm just going to repeat that. If we learn to deal with our own shadow, we have done something real for the world. We have succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic unsolved social problems of our day. That's my emphasis there. So here's our practice for today. Our practice for today in this week of Kite Say is to recognize that aspect of ourselves which you might understand as Amalek. That is the inner grasping part of ourselves that imagines ourselves as separate and apart, that thinks that we actually own our lives, that we own the world, that we own other people, that we have the right to control. And to let that go, to practice letting that go. First by noticing its presence, and then by letting it go. And shifting, as Sam writes elsewhere in this essay, from the gaze of acquisitiveness, of acquiring, to a gaze of appreciation by, in the words of 12-step programs, letting go and letting God. Letting go and letting God. I want to invite us to take this into our practice today and just, there was a lot of words, I know, and a lot of text, but let's keep it simple for our practice for the next 13 minutes or so. So I invite you to find a position again that for your practice that feels like a comfortable position for you today. You feel relaxed. If it's comfortable for you to rest the soles of your feet on the floor and feel the support of the chair, feel the support of your cushion or the floor, feel the support of this group, and know you're not alone. None of us is alone in this practice. We've come together for this. We are supporting each other. If it's comfortable to close your eyes, bring your attention inward, soften your gaze. It's helpful to turn away from the screen, find a focal point outside your window or somewhere in the room where you're sitting. Something that just enables you to be present to what is true right now. Not what has happened and not what will be. Just right now, what's happening right now. What's happening in your body. What's happening in the room, the space where you're sitting. And our practice is really, for all those words, actually fairly simple. I want to bring awareness to our effort. Instead of taking a breath or releasing our breath, we're going to try to practice to allow ourselves to be breathed, allowing it to arise on its own and on its own rhythm. Allow it to fill our lungs and belly without additional effort on our part, without drawing it in, without pulling it in, without trying to control it. And allowing it simply to flow back out of us, just as water might flow into a cave and then flow back out. The tide may come in, the tide may go out, just allowing the tide of the breath to rise and fall on its own. Let that be your anchor if the breath is helpful for you. For others, it may be sensation in the body. Just noticing sensations come and go in the body. The pulsations, you might be able to notice your own pulse, your own heartbeat, the blood pumping through your body. And finally, you might work with the sounds in the room, listening to the ambient sounds as they arise and fall away. This is Shmita practice. This is letting go of effort. Just letting ourselves bear witness and notice what's true. And to the extent that we find ourselves grasping or trying to hold on, control, instead of judging ourselves for that, in that moment, you might want to put your hand on your heart and offer some kind, compassionate awareness. We all have that Amalek. We all have the desire to grasp and hold on to and control. It's just a human thing. We're just being human beings, trying to let go and let God. So let's sit in silence for the next 8 minutes or so. the last few minutes of our sitting, with each breath letting go of the illusion of ownership, surrendering our sense of entitlement or control over our bodies or our lives or others, or right to do as we will with this planet and this environment. Understanding each breath, each sensation, each sound is a gift given to us to hold in trust for the good of all. Releasing effort, releasing control, releasing entitlement. Releasing privilege. And I'm inviting you, as if your eyes have been closed, to slowly and gently allow them to open. Come back to the group. If your gaze has been softened, let it sharpen. And we punctuate our practice, as we are doing throughout the month of Elul, by listening to the sound of the shofar. Grateful to Jonathan Silver, who will be our Baal Tekiah. And John, I know you want to offer a kavanah before blowing today.
It's such a privilege and an honor to be able to do this. And for me, I'm going to just a couple of words. Sounding the shofar is my personal spiritual practice. That I first was given a shofar by my father's father in sometime in the late 1960s. And I started sounding the shofar junior congregation at Congregation Bethel in Highland Park, Illinois. And so I've been doing this some time after over 55 years. And then after my father passed away 49 years ago, it was then my practice on Morning Minyan for his yard site that I would sound the shofar. And if I were going to be sounding the shofar for the holidays, that would be when I would start practicing. So it would be the first time I would sound the shofar for the year. In all honesty, I practiced a couple of days ago. But sounding the shofar is so much connected with, it's not just sounding the shofar, it just has so much personal meaning. So
Thank you so much, John. Beautiful and so powerful. And may your dad's memory continue to be a blessing in that wonderful association of your practice. We seal our practice with an opportunity for all those in mourning, whether it's you have a yard site, a recent loss, or carrying some grief, to seal the practice by reciting the Mourner's Kaddish, and invite you to put the name or names of those you're remembering in the chat box now or after Kaddish. Thanks to Tamari and I for sharing the words on the screen. And those of you who are doing so, I invite you to rise with me in body or in spirit. Yitkadal,
Yikadash,
Yikadash,
Shemei
Shemei Rabba,
Rabba,
Elma, Te
Te
Yamli,
Yamli,
Te
Mute,
Kayakon,
Kayakon,
Yamekom,
Yomekom,
Yeh Dechal Beit
Yeh
Israel,
Dechal Beit
Agala,
Yisrael,
Bisman
Agala,
Kavi,
B'Zman
Vimru, Amen.
V'Mru, Amen.
Hey Shmei Rabba Barach,
Yoam
Lamei
Meomaya,
Barach,
Barach, Ishtabach, Bar
V'Yitkam,
V'Yitnaseh,
V'Yitnaseh,
V'Yitadar, Shmei
Glal,
Dekushabri,
Mei Dechal,
Elam Yinkal Birchata
Kiplan,
V'Shirata,
Kol Birchat,
Shbachata V'Nechamata Da'amiran V'Yovam
Shmata
V'Yimru, Amen.
V'Nechama, Da'amiram
Shema Rabban
V'Aman,
Bishmaya B'Chaim Aleinu V'Yal Kol Yisrael
Hey
V'Yimru,
Shlama
Amen.
Rabba V'Yishmaya,
Shalom
Chaim
B'Romav,
Aleinu V'Yal
Aseh
Kol
Shalom,
Yisrael, V'Yimru,
Kol
Amen.
Yisrael V'Yal Kol
Shalom
Yoshvei
B'Romav,
Tavel,
Yes, Shalom
Hu,
Aleinu, Israel, Yakol Yoshvei Tevel,
Amen.
V'Yimru, Amen.
Amen.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us. Again, Shavua Tov. We hope you'll join us as much as you can for this second week of practice for the shofar. Again, many thanks to Jonathan Silver for being our Baal Tekiah today and for sponsoring our practice and loving. Whoops, I missed, I was muted for all of that. Want to thank all of you for being here in the second week of the Shofar Project and hope you'll join us as you're able for the rest of this week in our practice for Torah study with Jonathan Slater tomorrow and for the daily meditations at this time. Tomorrow will be led by Rabbi Miriam Klotz in practice at 12:30. Thanks to Jonathan Silver for being our wonderful Baal Tekiah today. And thank you, John, as well, so much for sponsoring our practice in loving memory of your dad, Eliyahu Silver, Eliyahu Avigdor Ben Isa, Zichrono Livracha. May his memory always be a blessing in this world. Thanks to Tamar Yanai for holding our tech space with grace and skill, as always. And for those of you who would like to stay on, if you have any questions about the teaching I shared today or about the practice or about Shemitah, you're welcome to stay on, and I'll keep, you can put them in the chat box and I'll try to respond as best I can. And for those who are leaving, hope you have a good and safe and healthy rest of the day. And we hope we'll see you back soon, either for Torah study tomorrow or for one of our daily mindfulness meditations. And if you're joining us for the first time or you just joined us recently, we're just really, really glad to welcome you aboard. Thanks for being with us. Okay, so I will keep an eye on the chat box and let's see, already a question. Let's see. I'm scrolling up. Please expand on the Jung quote and offer guidance on how to deal with our own shadow, implication for relationships with ourselves and others. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, there was, so here's the way I was understanding it. I was just to retrace, because as you know, for those of you who've been with us, I like to kind of recap and reiterate the teaching just for the sake of clarity and to consider how to bring it into the rest of the day, into our daily lives. So in Sam's essay, he was suggesting that the issue that we're dealing with, or that the Shemitah practice is meant to address, is our human instinct, our natural human instinct to mistake ourselves as separate and apart from, as Sam puts it, the great oneness of being, the interdependent oneness of being. We think of ourselves, we all think of our lives, we think of ourselves having a lifespan and we have our separate bodies. Of course, there's good reason why we might think of ourselves as separate and apart, but it is an illusion when it comes down to it. We are implicated and connected to everything. That's the greater truth. That's one of the great truths that Judaism testifies to. And so Shemitah practice is a kind of counteractive measure, a reminder to notice that illusion and to release it, to let it go. But as Sam says, it's not so easy to do that. The prospect of letting go of that illusion, of considering ourselves part, and all the ramifications and implications of that, the implications that we're responsible and connected to for everything that happens in this world is quite overwhelming. And losing our distinctive separate sense of self can be, is deeply threatening. So we can have anxiety, and that anxiety, if we don't notice it or deal with it appropriately, can cause us to double down on our attachment to the illusion of separateness. And so the Shemitah practice, as Sam was describing, prescribed a number of ways of letting go. So I tried to connect that with the Torah portions and this passage about Amalek. And Amalek, for those not familiar, is this prototype of evil in Jewish tradition and in the Torah, usually associated with external enemies who are understood as, as iterations of this arch enemy. But in the Hasidic tradition and mystical tradition, nothing is really separate and apart. And so the teaching from Rabbi Yitzchak was, we all have that quality of Amalek within us. And I was suggesting that that Amalek quality is akin to what Sam was describing as this grasping, controlling, dominating, extracting, making use of, manipulating for our benefit. That's an instinct that we all have within us. We don't really like admitting it, particularly. I speak for myself. I do not like to admit that. So I will instead much prefer to see that quality in other people and demonize them and project it onto them. I'd much rather focus on the shortcomings of other people in that regard, and think of myself as innocent. But the Jung practice, so the connection was their Amalek is in the world. The Jewish mystical tradition says, don't look for it outside yourself. It's in ourselves as well. And Jung's prescription is to say, here's the process. The process is, first of all, to notice our inclination to project and just to let that go. So, for example, to say, I'm going to let go of the pleasure I get in assigning blame and judging others. And instead, I'm going to look inward. So that might be step one. That's a Shemitah practice right there. What would life look like for me if I were to let go of projecting my faults onto others, or to ignore in myself the faults that I like to find in others? What if I were to let that go and bring the focus inward towards myself? That's a painful prospect to own that. But step one is to acknowledge that in ourselves. And here, I think the key is not to feel hypercritical or judgmental of ourselves for having the instinct to be controlling, to manipulate, to be self-centered, to be selfish, to want to own, to grasp, to want more than what I actually need, and to forgive that in myself when I don't forgive that in others. Every time I want to turn, this might be a mundane example, every time I want to, I'm aware of the impact of the climate crisis. Every time I want to turn down the air conditioning to make it colder for myself beyond what it really needs to be, and I excuse that, what's the difference? But I want to be cooler. I'm still too warm. If I can notice that in myself, and I can be compassionate about my humanness, that is part and parcel of being human. If I can let that go and soften around that tendency within myself, if I can own my shadow, as Jung puts it, and it might lose some of that power and control over me. And I think that's really, I guess, my description of the process. It's part of letting go of our inner Amalek, letting go of our inner shadow, but first by acknowledging its presence and turning towards it with curiosity and compassion instead of with harsh judgment. So, Laura, I hope that's helpful. Oh, Lester, great question. Well, this idea of the Jubilee, the Yovel, was to return land to its ancestral owners, right? To the indigenous people. Lester asked the question, if the practice of Jubilee was to return all property to the original tribal owner, did the Israelites return their land to the Canaanites? Has this practice ever been done in real time and place? It seems it's unclear, in fact, whether the Yovel was ever practiced And I think what we want to do here, and certainly was not returned by the Israelites to their Canaanite owners, as in accordance with that principle. In fact, it's based on the idea of returning the land to the original Israelite owners, to whom the land was allotted when the land was inhabited by the Israelites. But what we're trying to do is extract from that mitzvah, from that practice, a principle that we can apply. And it is one which has to do with this idea, the essential idea of the Yovel, which is that no one owns land. Even the original inhabitants don't own the land. Well, whoever, if there is such a thing as original inhabitants, we're all just gerim v'toshavim. We are just strangers and temporary residents in the land, which is entrusted to us and which is given to us to use and to serve. That's the basic principle. And so the practice here, and there are, of course, political implications for how we deal with land as well, is to notice our inclination to assert our ownership and to hold on to that ownership, and to, in this year at least, try to let some of that go, even a little bit if we can. Okay, let's see. Let go and let God sometimes bumps up against feelings of responsibility and obligation and honor to care for a dependent and the ill parent, child, or stranger in pain. Would you speak to this dissonance and struggle? Another great question, Lori. We're only talking about one part of the equation here in this letting go, because that could be a prescription just for passivity, of course, just letting go, just letting go, just letting go, letting go of effort. The other side of the equation is that effort and working at something is still, for example, assisting others and not being passive, but taking action is an essential part of it. So if we want to think about it that way, we've got 6 years of exertion and effort, and then 1 year of Shemitah, of letting go. So if we just take that proportion, that's what we're trying to do, is we can get wrapped up in our effort to help and to control. And this is a little bit of a corrective. So letting go and letting God is just becomes suffused in that effort, so that we can, that's the best way I've ever heard it expressed. Some of you may have heard of this very famous sermon that was given by a conservative rabbi in New York City, Rabbi Milton Steinberg, who was rabbi for a long time at Park Avenue Synagogue. We gave a sermon, To Hold with Open Arms. And it really kind of captures that paradox of, it's not that we're just meant to let go. We are meant to hold, but loosely, with open arms, or with soft hands, with a soft heart. So the question is, how do we integrate attachment and connection and caring and effort? How do we infuse that also with some degree of surrender, letting go of ownership, of assuming that of total control? That's how I understand it anyway. Okay. There is a question. Oh boy, a lot of good questions. I'm troubled by the difficulty of connecting this letting go with the doomed efforts in Afghanistan. Well, we only have a minute. I don't know that I can necessarily respond. I don't know that I have a response to that, really. I think for myself, I don't know about many of you. Each of us has, I think, is feeling a lot of pain about what is happening. A lot of pain. I feel like all I can do right now for myself is acknowledge that pain. The question of the balance between exertion of effort in service of life and protecting human freedoms and rights, etc., and acknowledging the limits of control. I don't know what the right balance is there. Can't say that. I can't speak to that myself. I think for now, just I know that I'm feeling a really heavy heart and a lot of pain, as many of you are, about this situation. Well, I see there are many more messages and probably lots of good questions that we're not going to get to today. But if you will like to email me, I will do my best. If you have something that's pressing, I'd be happy to try to respond the best I can. As always, a privilege to be with you all and an honor, and look forward to seeing you. I actually will be here tomorrow to host with Rabbi Miriam Plotz leading us. So thanks again to Jonathan Silver for that beautiful sounding of the shofar and for sponsoring our practice today. And thanks to Tamar for holding her space. I hope to see you tomorrow.